So I'm Gary Niemen, and I'm a technical writer of 25 years, and now a product manager at Spotify. And I work in a team. We're working on technical documentation and solving the problems around that. And I work in a group, a squad, tribe, who work with developer experience. So I think this is spot on. So the talk is called The Hero's Journey and how we're solving technical documentation at Spotify. Spoiler alert, by treating docs like code. And in fact, it's kind of treating docs like code plus more things. That will become clear later. The alternative name for this talk could have been We Told You So, Signed Engineers of the World. Okay, for a technical writer. That makes sense. So the hero's journey, what's that? It's in the 1940s, this guy called Joseph Campbell. He analyzed all the myths and stories of the world. Not all of them probably, but most of them. And he came up with kind of a template that kind of all stories are like based on this one story. It's kind of a departure, an initiation, and a return. That's how it's kind of broken up. And Joseph Campbell's 17, it was 17 steps originally. I'm not going to do all 17. I'm going to go for the 12 version. And you'll find these underlying themes in all of your favorite films, things like The Matrix and Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. And you find it even in the Technical Writer's Saga, that very famous film. So I'm going to be the hero in this story because I'm giving the presentation, so I get to be the hero. But it's about the team, and this is the team at Spotify where I work. We're continuing the film theme, Pulp Fiction we are called, and 2 engineers and 2 technical writers and engineering manager who's here, and myself. So the step 1 is ordinary world, and that's like what the world was, that's kind of what the situation was like before the adventure. So at Spotify, we have like about 1,500 engineers, and a lot of the engineers are making tools or platforms for other engineers at Spotify. So there's a great need for technical documentation. So this is about that type of documentation. It's about internal technical documentation. Because of Spotify's culture of the teams can work in the way they want, it happened over time that when teams realized they wanted to do some technical documentation, they would do it sometimes in Confluence, they would do it sometimes in Google Docs, they would sometimes knock up a website, they sometimes do a README file in GitHub, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There was like tons of technical documentation spread over everywhere. And of course, then other engineers looking for this documentation, they couldn't find it when they needed it. We had a search engine, but it didn't work that well, and it broke after a while, so sort of chaos situation. And okay, so is this a problem worth solving? And it became apparent that the answer to that question was yes, because in a productivity survey that we ran at Spotify about 1.5 years ago, not finding the information that you need turned out to be number 3, a blocker. So yes, it's a problem worth solving. And coupled with this situation, we had technical writers. We had about 3 technical writers that were spread around the infrastructure teams, and they were like solving smaller problems within the individual groups. So they weren't solving the big problem for Spotify at all. They were solving individual problems. So this was a situation about 1 year ago. So the call to adventure, that's the next step. And I would say, interestingly, the call to adventure started when one of the tech writers spotted a talk that Google had done about 3 years ago at a Write the Docs conference. And I was quite astonished when I saw it, because they had exactly the same problems that we had spotted in our organization. And they'd started to solve it, and even solved it using like a docs-like code solution. So we watched this video and we thought, my God, that is it. We should be doing something like that. And then coincidentally, we were like about a week away from Hack Week at Spotify. So Hack Week, you can do what you want for a week. And with a couple of colleagues, we decided to try and just do something like what we saw Google had done. And we did that, and it worked out quite well, and we showed it off to people, and we said, oh, look what we've done, and this is going to solve documentation. So we really kind of like flirted. Whenever we saw a manager, we kind of went, oh, look at this and this. And within like a couple of weeks of that, one of somebody in sort of a higher position than us who could make some changes, like started to think about this and said, like, what happens if we put the tech writers in a team and get some engineers, and what would it take to do this really well here at Spotify? And the next step is the refusal of the call. Yes, I've been like a technical writer, as I said, for 25 years, and there's like, oh my God, like this is like completely different. In the past, I've worked in like markdown type, sort of tagging type documentation solution, so that was okay. And in the past, I'd implemented engineer workflow, but using Microsoft Word, and those like didn't really work. And then, but I knew that this was like completely different, a docs-like code approach. Could I give up my craft in a way that I've been like working with for years? And of course the answer is yes, otherwise I wouldn't be here today. So the next step is meeting the mentor. So what's that about? At this stage, we were just like 3 technical writers in a team. And we had a hypothesis, we'd seen this video, but that's about all. So we needed to kind of get some more meat on this. And so one thing we did was some user research to validate the hypothesis that we had, not only for the solution, but for the problem. Sort of mainly for the problem. And then we were fortunate that we got a very experienced product manager to help us get started. So that's a bit like meeting the mentor. And we got an engineer who, bonus, was really enthusiastic about this topic. And so that was a big moment. So crossing the threshold, this is like, so we got started. So we had our team, and we were going to build something like what we'd done in Hack Week and something like the Google thing. And so we spent weeks and weeks with complex design processes, complicated architectural design, and this was it. That's the Spotify equivalent of a napkin. So within a couple of weeks, actually, we got out an alpha version of what we called tech docs, and this is we're very, very fortunate. So how did we do it in 2 weeks? We were very fortunate that we had a lot of internal stuff that we could rely on. So first of all, we work in GitHub, so that's a big plus, and then we have a CI/CD system there, so we could use that. And we quickly picked mkdocs as our static site generator. Somebody had worked with that before and said they thought it was good, so we tested a few, but then we went for mkdocs. And storage in GCS, and we have this thing at Spotify that's an internal developer platform. And so we had that already where we could expose the websites. So we managed to knock this up fairly quickly, and that's what it looks like. So, yes. So steps 6, 7, and 8 are all about challenges in the hero's journey. I'm back to the hero's journey. Yeah, they're all about challenges, etc. And so as a technical writer for many years, I've noticed and experienced many, many problems of technical documentation that need to be solved. And these are some of them. Maybe it's all of them. I don't know. I'm going to flick through them quite quickly. Maybe not in this order. So technical documentation at scale, yeah, that's kind of what I mentioned before a bit. Like, how do we've got 1,500 engineers. We can't hire 100 technical writers. How do we solve this? Discoverability and findability. Findability, you know what you're looking for, so that's kind of search. Discoverability, you don't know what you're looking for, but you want to discover it. That's a problem of technical documentation solutions. Trust, how can you trust what you find? Maintenance, it's very easy to create documents or documentation, but how do you maintain it afterwards? That often gets forgotten. Feedback loop, that is about that somebody making comments on a document, on a piece of documentation, that those comments will get to the one who, or the team who owns that documentation, and they will correct it, and then you get a feedback loop. Hidden knowledge, that's many engineers having lots of knowledge that's in their head and that's not shared. Ownership is a bit connected to no handover process, so documentation kind of has to be owned. If it's not owned, it will absolutely decay over time, and then a handover process needs to be in place, otherwise you won't have ownership eventually. Used and useful, I think teams who create documentation really want to know that it's used and that it's useful for their own. They put a lot of work into putting some documentation up, and they need to know. Adoption and engagement, that's about, there are often different use cases and different needs, so you kind of have to think about that. You can't just ignore that. And then I left the one top left to last because at the bottom of all this is the key problem that when engineers get stuck and they want to use documentation to get unstuck, then you want to help them fast, and they want to get unstuck fast. So that really is the key problem underneath all this. So these are some or all of the problems with technical documentation. And what I think is that with Docs Like Code and Docs Like Code Plus, that I'll show in a second, we're kind of solving like all of these almost. I don't want to say all, but we're basically solving pretty much all of this. So I'm just going to show like 4 or 5 examples. I'm not going to go through everything. So yeah, this is just the basic how to do tech documentation at scale. I mean, this is really enabling the engineers. So just make it super easy. The documentation is as close to the code as possible. It's in Markdown, so it's like super easy. And we provide a navigation. You don't have to have the navigation, but if you want, you can have navigation. That's on the left. And then it produces a doc site. And the doc site looks pretty good. I mean, just super easy for engineers, in line with their workflow completely, in the tools that they're using every day. We make this information card, as it's called at the moment, but it will be a trust card eventually. So for each documentation site, you've got the owner. We get that from GitHub. the docs was last updated. We get that from GitHub. The open issues, again, I'll talk about that in a second, the next slide. Top contributors, and we have some support help as well. And in the future, we're going to make this into more of a trust card. So maybe you get sort of like a percentage showing how reliable this piece of documentation is. Of course, we need to work out like what variables go into that, but we think it's doable. This is feedback loops. So you're in a piece of documentation. So a user is in a piece of documentation, and they have the option of either they click that and they go directly into GitHub and they can submit a PR, or they can highlight a piece of text and select that for opening a GitHub issue, and that's the number that I showed before. So that's one doc site per repo, and it can be a repository with code, or it can be a repository that's just a documentation repository. So that's feedback loop. And this is an example of Docs Like Code Plus. I mean, this is not classic Docs Like Code, but we've kind of added onto it to give extra functionality. This is our doc homepage. So this is addressing discoverability and findability. So we've implemented a pretty decent search at the top there, and then we provide links for special Spotify useful documents, for example, the engineering handbook and such. And then in the future, we're going to sort of develop some more like lists, like, for example, top 10 doc sites and stuff. There's a lot we can do with generating automatic information. So again, this is Docs Like Code Plus. We're building on the Docs Like Code, and then we're sort of plusing it. And then finally, in this small piece, we've implemented code-based graphics as well. So a lot of engineers were saying, yeah, we don't want to sort of do our graphics in this and that tool. Can't you implement it in code? At first I thought, wow, sort of, does anyone really want to kind of like make a graphic using code? But yes, engineers want that. So we implemented, so we support plant UML and graph viz. And the interesting story with this is that we didn't even implement this inside our team. We've had such good adoption for TechDocs, and people really like it. So this functionality actually came from contributors. They asked if we supported it, we said no, and they did it. Perfect. So yes, so in the hero's journey, we're up to 9. I wonder what time I'm up to. This is the reward. And the reward for me is the impact that we're having in the organization and the love that we get for TechDocs. I mean, as a tech writer for 25 years, I could really say that I really often felt that I didn't have the impact that I wanted to have. I would create maybe pieces of documentation that I thought were really good, and they were much appreciated, and yeah, this really helps, and this is really good. And then after 6 months, I was working on something else, and that piece of documentation was not maintained, and it sort of died. I really feel in what we're doing now with Docs Like Code, we're really having an impact in the organization. Yeah, and sort of lots of positive feedback, and really cool. And I get to do talks like this, so that's also a reward. Yes, 10, the road back. So this, on the hero's journey, this is the road back. I don't know if you could visualize that. I think Luke coming back in the, I don't know. Anyway, but yes, so hero's journey and all that, but actually, to be honest, it has been super easy. It's gone really quickly, and it has been easy. So why is that? What's our success factors? So these are them. There's more actually, but I just stuck to these. I don't know if I'll say them all. A cross-functional team, that was absolutely essential, fantastic. That we were solving a real problem in the organization. I mean, the organization was kind of hungry for this. It was almost desperate, so we really filled a hole. We fully embraced Docs like Code, so we didn't say, oh yeah, we're going to do Docs like Code, but if you want to use Confluence, that's okay. No, we've been really opinionated, and we've like standardized and centralized and said, no, it's Docs like Code, that's the way we're going. We had a quick development of a minimum lovable product. Thanks to Lee for that. Good adoption, so that's given us confidence going forward. Collaboration, I mentioned, for example, the graphics functionality. At Spotify, we get to own the problem and the solution, so that's meant that we can be opinionated and say that this is the way to do technical documentation at Spotify. There is no other way. We were able to build on existing technology. And the other, and the one I missed out on purpose, was we had a clear and inspiring vision, which is this. Spotify is using technical documentation go from stuck to unstuck in less than a minute. So that's quite ambitious, but it's a vision, and yeah, we're shifting the needle, I think. The resurrection, this is the final battle. In the hero's journey, this is the final battle. And if you imagine in The Matrix, I think it's Reloaded, where Nemo, is it Nemo? No. Nemo, that's another thing, right? Neo, he's up against like 1,000 or 1,000,000 Agent Smiths. I remember just seeing that. I think, how can he cope with like 1,000,000 of those? The resurrection, what is this? This is convincing other technical writers that Docs like Code is the way to go. Okay, no one got that. Okay, so yes, so return with Elixir. So this is return with, the Elixir is like the Holy Grail, and this is actually the concept that made me think of this theme for this talk, because for me, Docs like Code has been the Holy Grail. For a technical writer, I have experienced this whole thing with Docs like Code as being the Holy Grail. So what have we learned? I would say keep focused on the key problem. Keep the solution simple so it just works, fiercely optimized for the engineer, enable others to build on the platform, and standardize and centralize. What's next? We need to work more on trust and maintenance, as I've mentioned a bit. It's been a year, we've got 1,000 dog sites. All the information is pretty new. People trust the information. I suspect that within 6 months, people are going to start going, oh, I can't find anything, and oh, I don't know, if I can trust this. So we really need to make sure that we have more things in place with all the information that we have now to make sure that it's trusted and maintained as well. And then we've talked about open sourcing tech docs, so we're going to discuss that further, and we might do so. And then we haven't solved yet in code documentation, for example, for APIs. We haven't solved that yet, and there's a big ask in the organization. So we need to get that into tech docs as well somehow. We're not sure yet. So that's going to be a challenge. We want all of the technical documentation to be centralized, to be in one place, and then we can, people can find it, and we can do stuff if it's all in one place. I think that's all I have.